last rule that we need to memorize for today's lesson. This rule is called the horizontal asymptotes rule. It is also called the end behavior rules. Now, I personally will always call it end behavior because horizontal asymptotes, they're called asymptotes, but you can actually cross them. So that's why I don't really like to call them asymptotes, because in my head, you can't cross an asymptote. So instead of calling it a horizontal asymptote, I usually refer to it as end behavior because it's talking about what the ends of the graph are doing. It has nothing to do with what the middle of the graph is doing. It's only about what the ends of the graph are doing. Now, our end behavior rule, we actually have 3 sub-rules for our end behavior. And the sub-rules are based on the degree. Oops, purple highlighter. So if you remember from chapter 2, we talked about the degree of the polynomial is the biggest exponent. So we are actually going to compare the degree of the numerator to the degree of the denominator and see how those two things compare. So let's practice that in example 5. In example 5, if I look at the numerator, the degree of the numerator, the biggest exponent is a 1. The degree of the denominator, the biggest exponent is a 2. So you'll notice in this case, my degree on top is less than my degree on bottom. So that is going to be this first rule. If the degree on top is less than the degree on bottom. I'll sometimes call this the, oops, wrote the wrong word. There we go. I will sometimes call this the bottom heavy rule. The bottom is bigger than the top. So if you look at your degrees and they are bottom heavy, then your horizontal asymptote, your end behavior, is y equals 0. And we'll talk about more of what that means in just a second and how we graph that. For now, we just need to find it. So if it's bottom heavy, we write y equals 0. And that's our answer. We're done. We move on. So let's compare B. The degree on top is a 2. That's my biggest exponent. Degree on bottom is a 1. This is a top-heavy end behavior. And this is actually the second advanced rule that we will learn about in 3.3. So for now, we're just going to put not applicable. We're not learning about the top-heavy rule yet. Let's look at C. The degree on top is a 3, biggest exponent. The degree on bottom is also a 3, biggest exponent. Now if I compare the degrees here, these degrees are the same. They are equal to each other. So this is a different end behavior rule. If the degrees are the same, if they are equal, then I'm going to do y equals and look at the leading coefficients. Leading coefficient is the number in front where we found the degree. So if I look here, since they're equal, we're going to go y equals, oops, do that in blue. And I look at the leading coefficient on top is a 6. And the leading coefficient on bottom is a -2. So I'm going to simplify that and get an answer for y equals -3. So let's practice this on one example really quickly. If I come up here and I look at this example, I have this equation right here. Let's try this rule. First, we look at the degree on top and bottom to know which rule to use. So the degree on top, biggest exponent is a 1. Degree on bottom, biggest exponent is a 1. This is the rule where the degrees are equal to each other. They are the same. So we know that rule is when the degrees are equal, when they are the same, we do y equals, and then we look at the leading coefficients. So if I look at the leading coefficient here, I have a 2, and a leading coefficient here, I have a secret 1. So my answer to this one would be y equals 2. And you'll notice that in the graph of this problem, the ends of the graph are approaching the y value of 2. Now, like I said, I don't like to draw this as an asymptote. I don't like to draw it as a solid line because we're going to get to some pretty complicated graphs, and we're going to see that you can cross this line. That does happen. So that's why instead of drawing it as a line, as an asymptote, I like to draw it as stars. So because this end behavior is y equals 2, I'll go to 2 on both sides and draw stars. And then I just have to remember that on my graph, I can be cheesy. On my graph, I need to point to the star. Point to the stars. And if you point to the star on the end of your graph, then you are doing okay. That's where we need to go. So that is our first 2 rules for end behavior, or what they call horizontal asymptotes. On 3.3, we'll learn the last rule, which is when it's top heavy. So now that we have all 5 rules done, in the next video, we'll start putting all 5 rules together and start graphing these problems.